Two countries undergoing two very different political transformations. Sudanese protesters demand the right to pick their next leader, while Indonesians hold the world's largest presidential election. I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmakers are the people of Sudan and Indonesia. We start in Sudan, where a transitional military council thought they'd give themselves 2 years to rebuild the government following last week's ouster of President Omar al-Bashir. But demonstrators aren't having any of it. They're continuing a sit-in, which first pushed to end Bashir's presidency and is now demanding the military hand control back to the people. Maybe their suspicion of the general stems from a system of cronyism that flourished for decades, or from fears that Sudan could be the next Egypt. But the military is trying to placate the protesters. They're promising to replace the heads of the army, police and intelligence agencies, lift restrictions on the media, and even ask the opposition to pick the next prime minister. But will that be enough? With more, here's Francis Collins.
It's a presidency that was defined by war, but ended by the military. Omar al-Bashir seized power in Sudan in 1989 and ruled with an iron fist. He's now under military detention, and the country's at a watershed. As a brigadier in the Sudanese army, Bashir took control during the long civil war between the north and the south. He wanted to keep Sudan united, but the eventual peace deal in 2005 led to a referendum in 2011. It saw the independent state of South Sudan declared 6 months later, but the succession of the South also took 3/4 of the country's oil. For years, Bashir has been a pariah in Western eyes. Accused in 2009 of war crimes and crimes against humanity, stemming from the conflict in the Darfur province that began in 2003. He was indicted by the International Criminal Court.
We hear story after story of armed men attacking defenseless women and children, of women being raped.
The United Nations called the actions of Bashir's forces ethnic cleansing, and estimated between 200 and 400,000 people died. But one thing has been made clear: the ousted president won't be sent to The Hague to face the war crimes charges, not in the short term.
We as a military council will not deliver the president abroad during our period in office. We have our values. We are soldiers. If they want to deliver him, let them do this after us.
Protests that began in Sudan in September over fuel and bread prices gathered momentum and turned into a wider call for the end of Bashir's rule. But it came at a human cost. Dozens were killed during crackdowns, with hundreds reportedly imprisoned. And despite Bashir's exit, protesters fear the military takeover could be much of the same.
We came out from our houses so the situation would change and so that Bashir would step down and to have a better person take charge. A 4-month journey where we didn't do anything, and the people who died for nothing because nothing has changed.
Which is why, they say, the street protests will continue.
We have an example like Egypt. 8 years ago, they pushed them out of Tahrir Square. Until today, no one is allowed into Tahrir Square. If the people leave their position, expect this revolution to fail and expect them to disappear.
He led his country for 3 decades, but Omar al-Bashir, in a few short days, has become part of the past. But those who've been close to him for 30 years may want to hold on to power. For Sudan to avoid anarchy, this is a political crisis that will need to be solved quickly and peacefully. Francis Collins, The Newsmakers.
Let's go to our panel now. In Houston, we have Suzanne Jambo, who's the chairwoman of South Sudan Steps Towards Peace and Democracy Party. And in New York, we have Suleiman Baldo. He's the policy director for the Enough Project, an organization aiming to end crimes against humanity. And full disclosure, we did have somebody who was close to Bashir and a member of the ruling party. Unfortunately, technical glitches meant that we couldn't get to that interview, which is terribly unfortunate. But let me start with you, Suzanne. Is this an expression of people power? Is this true people power on the streets of Sudan, or is it just a military coup dressed up as something that pretends to be listening to the people?
I guess on the straight up answer would be definitely it's the people's power taking to the street persistently from December nonstop up to now. And the very fact that they still remain vigilant until they see really what the intention and the objectives of this Transitional Military Council, that it still remains primarily the people's power. But however, of course, the military seems to have stepped in and also tried to compromise with the population, with the rising population. So obviously, there has to be a convoy of governors, some sort of a semblance of a government that should take care of what the people want. But actually, it was as a result of the people uprising.
Suleiman Baldo, Suleiman Baldo, can those people who have taken to the streets so bravely and so enthusiastically, can they trust the military?
The people who took to the streets for the last 4 months and even before that, throughout the 30 years of President Omar al-Bashir's rule, have certain issues that they want to be addressed. They cannot trust anyone until they have responded positively to their demands and expectations around this issue. The issues that they want to see addressed are the dismantling of 30 years of the regime of President Omar al-Bashir, a regime of terror, based on total surveillance of society through the National Intelligence and Security Services, based on terrorizing population in marginal areas through attacking civilians, forcing 2 million people in Darfur into exile, forcing our brothers and sisters in South Sudan to opt for independence, forcing people in Blue Nile and South Kordofan to exile and displacement. There is also the issue of corruption. They would want to see also all the systematic institutional structural corruption of the regime to be dismantled. And their concerns as youth, because the people in the streets are the young people, young men, young women of Sudan, whose prospects in life are all facing dim futures because of the impact of that corruption on the economy. Until there is issues that address their own priorities, they will not disband the sit-ins, the protests, that are putting pressure on the regime so far.
Right. So, Suzanne, something that was so institutionally strong, this entire group of people, which could be numbered in the tens of thousands, people who benefited from Omar al-Bashir, people who were deeply invested in the government, they're not just going to roll over and die, right, or give up. So what do you address first? How do you actually begin the process of showing the protesters that you're taking their demands seriously?
Okay, I will begin first by clarifying one point. I'm actually a citizen of the Republic of South Sudan, but of course a former citizen of the Republic of Sudan. Yes. So yeah, so growing up, I grew up with Bashir coming into power and whatnot. Yeah, definitely the institutional dismantling of the National Congress Party, Bashir's ruling party for 30 years, is going to take a very, very huge undertaking. It's a huge undertaking because it's a mindset, it's a way of living, and it's a whole culture that has been prevailing for the past 30 years. I mean, at least 3 generations born in that, and of course, the adults that were born in there and whatnot. So basically, yes, from the military to the national security to the banking system to everything, as my brother was just saying earlier on, with the level of corruption and favoritism within and among the ranks of the ruling party, the National Congress Party, obviously, definitely. But I would also like to highlight from the perspective of us within South Sudan as well, what would this mean? I mean, perhaps if you can allow me in a few minutes, but I would like to elaborate on that. I mean, it would mean definitely sisterly relations, peaceful sisterly relations between the people of South Sudan and the people of Sudan. And it would mean a lot of addressing all outstanding issues like the border issues, like the economic issues, outstanding economic issues, and, you know, the oil flows onto the Republic of Sudan from South Sudan and all those other issues. So we anticipate not only that there will be dismantling, the institution dismantling and the and system of governance of the National Congress Party, but as well better relations
Right.
with the Republic of South
Yeah,
Sudan. Yes.
it would be interesting to see what kind of foreign policy or regional policy there will be, if there will be a civilian
Definitely.
government anytime soon. Suleiman, so we have this transitional military council led by Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah Abdurrahman Burhan. I guess the Egyptians will tell the Sudanese, be careful when there's an interim leader called Abdel Fattah. We know all about this, which brings me to, jokes aside, it brings me to the question then, Suleiman. Those who fear that this might be another Egypt situation, are those fears justified in reality?
They are justified because the Transitional Military Council has as members the top generals of President Omar al-Bashir. They wouldn't have been in the command of the different branches of the Sudan Armed Forces without utter trust and selection, rigorous selection based on loyalty to the regime of President Bashir. However, historic circumstances have put these generals in a very critical position. They either opt to salvage their own records and reputation by moving in the direction of meeting these demands of the population, and they have seen it for their own eyes because the population has opted to besiege the headquarters of the army, hoping that the army would resurrect itself and become a patriotic body defending the interest of the nation and not of the clique of the inner circle of power under Omar al-Bashir. Or they would continue to be an extension of the pillars of support for the regime of President Omar al-Bashir, and popular pressure is capable in that instance to dismantle them as they have deposed Omar al-Bashir, as they have deposed their fairest leader of the Transitional Council, Ibn Auf. They would be able to paralyze the country and force this Transitional Council out as well.
Suzanne, 10 years ago, I reported from Sudan, and at that time, it seemed as if Omar al-Bashir was omnipotent, and people didn't want to criticize him, whether it related to Darfur, whether it related to the South, which hadn't broken away yet. Tell me what's in it for the military, Suzanne, to turn against him? What do you think led them to say, okay, we don't want him anymore, and we're going to side with the protesters?
Well, one of two scenarios. Definitely the predominant scenario is siding with the people, or the country gets into anarchy and chaos. I mean, at the end of the day, the army is expected to be a professional national army for the people, as the Sudanese would say, the army of the people, the shab, So basically, that is the primary drive that will make the army to try and remain in as much as possible to side with the people. However, of course, loyalties have been there. I mean, 30 years of fisted rule, the National Congress Party has infiltrated the army itself, and there's a lot of political bias within the army. There's a lot of change with the years. Obviously, two things that will happen there. One is, first of all, the military generals among themselves also, they vary in degrees and extent. How much were they too loyal to President Bashir, or were they in between? So they know each other. And of course, the population itself, and this is one of the most admirable things that I would like to register about the population in Sudan, is their ability and skilled knowledge of who is who in the army, among the generals and of course National Security Service. This is quite admirable because, as you can see, it rarely ever happens that within less than 2 days or 3 days, you have one deposed president of 30 years, and then again, a president or caretaker president within less than 36 hours. So basically, that tells you how much the population is also aware, and how much the army itself is weighing out that, because otherwise the country falls into anarchy. Again, another thing that is also very important, I think, also is the fact that the economic hardship in Sudan we have really reached the brim. And obviously, it's very important that both the army itself, the generals themselves, as well as the population, through, of course, the Sudanese Professional Association, who seem to have been quite organized and with clear agenda and everything, to look into a suitable candidate that will actually appeal to the regional and international community to better the economic crisis
Right.
in the country. So this is a very important factor in his appeal as well, which I think the generals are also fully aware of as well. Yeah, to come out of that
Yeah,
situation.
it's been argued that the economy took people to the streets or spurred them to going to the streets in the first place. And talking about admirable, I guess it's interesting that according to the best available evidence, 2/3 of the protesters seem to be women. Most of the protesters seem to be young people. Suleiman, you're with the Enough Project. A lot of people want Omar al-Bashir to face justice for what happened in Darfur at the height of the conflict. So he's been indicted on charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity. So far, he has not been sent to The Hague. And a lot of African countries have supported the fact that Bashir should not go. This is really interesting now, Suleiman. Do you think that it should be a priority of this interim military government to push for him to go to The Hague and face justice, or is it something that should come down the line?
I believe justice is the priority. We have had 30 years of total repression, mass atrocities, genocidal actions in Darfur, Brunei, South Kordofan. It's not only Bashir. There was a whole system of violence and a whole system of a militia state that meted out this violence. For the Sudanese society to recover and to heal and to reconcile, there must be all forms of justice, including international justice, when in our national judiciary or any hybrid system that we may come up with, and then transitional justice approaches and mechanisms to be put in place to address the variety and the width of all these crimes that have been committed over 30 years. So for me, the priority is really justice. Omar al-Bashir should face the responsibility of having been the supreme commander that orchestrated the genocidal actions in Darfur. Definitely he should be held accountable before The Hague, where he's already indicted and wanted. But we need to have an entire system of transitional justice and criminal justice to address the responsibilities for all these violations of human rights of the Sudanese.
Suzanne, for those who are euphoric and in support of the protesters, and they see this moment as a moment of great hope for the Sudanese people, as somebody who's a citizen of South Sudan who saw euphoria and hope when you had your independence, only for things to spiral into civil war, what would you caution against?
I wouldn't so much caution against the Sudanese uprising. I would actually applaud it to begin with, and I even more so applaud it for the level of peacefulness and the level of organization and improvement from the Egyptian and the Algerian uprisings altogether. So really, the Sudanese have continued to be a case study for most of us the past few months, and especially the past 1 week or so, that we've been studying almost every action. And so for us, it sends a ray of hopefulness for the people of South Sudan, as you rightfully say, that December 2013, we ascended into anarchy and wars and conflict and whatnot, due to corruption as well, due to oppression as well.
Okay. Well, interesting times, people keeping a close eye on what's happening in Sudan and of course in Algeria as well. And again, a lot of people saying what you're saying, right? There seems to be a new maturity this time around. Maybe it's Arab Spring 2.0. It's a nice theory. Let's see if it plays out on the streets and in practice. For the moment, I have to move on. Suzanne Jambo and Suleiman Baldo, thanks for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Still to come, Indonesia holds the world's largest presidential election. We have a special report from Indonesia and debate who voters will choose as their next leader. For Indonesia, hosting the world's largest presidential election is known as Pesta Demokrasi or Democracy Party. Voters are celebrating their freedom to cast a ballot. But the campaigns of President Joko Widodo and his rival Prabowo Subianto have churned out 6 long months of divisive politicking. Their rematch from 2014's election has put religion and the economy at center stage. And while Widodo is a favorite in the polls, internet trolls are trying to upend his re-election with fake news. We'll talk about that in a moment with the country's communications minister. But first, here's Natalie Perhonen, who went to Jakarta and filed this report.
The finish line for Indonesia's presidential election is in sight. It's a rematch of the 2014 campaign with President Joko Widodo, known as Jokowi, going head-to-head with former General Prabowo Subianto. The president's Indonesian Democratic Party of Struggle, or PDIP, versus Prabowo's Great Indonesia Movement Party, Gerindra. When Jokowi came to power, it was seen as a break with the traditional political elite. He is, after all, a former furniture salesman. But this time around, he's running with the confidence that comes with being the incumbent. Most polls show Jokowi and his running mate, conservative Muslim cleric Maruf Amin, have a double-digit lead. The choice of Maruf has been seen as his way of shoring up the religious vote. This is Jokowi mania.
It's hard to describe just how electric the atmosphere is here. It's more like a crowd at a rock concert or a football final instead of at a campaign rally. But this is exactly the kind of enthusiasm that Team Jokowi has been trying to build to give the president another term in office.
These supporters have spent hours waiting in the baking heat. But you wouldn't know it.
Kita harus pastikan hidup kita lebih baik dari hari ini untuk 5 tahun ke depan.
It's a message which needs to resonate beyond this stadium. Jokowi's campaign promises have focused on improving infrastructure and helping the poorest members of society. Rival Prabowo and his VP candidate Sandiaga Uno have kept the economy front and centre of their campaign, including plans to cut taxes and reduce the reliance on foreign investment. Prabowo acknowledges they're from the country's 1%. Sandiaga is a millionaire businessman and former deputy governor of Jakarta. Just like Jokowi, Sandiaga is also more than capable of commanding an audience fit for a celebrity. The 49-year-old has been tasked with bringing in the millennial vote for Gerindra.
There are 63 million of the, we call it millennials, who would be missing, I guess, a very important decisions for the country. So we need to use the best of our resources to attract them.
His message of entrepreneurship is winning over fans at this rally. But there are concerns that this has been a polarising campaign, focusing too much on the candidate's religious credentials. Gerindra has secured the support of a number of conservative Muslim parties. But Sandiaga says the economy is the top political priority.
We believe there is always an attempt to get the majority of because Muslim is the biggest religion, and each side wants to get the Muslim votes as much as possible. But Prabowo and I have been very clear from day one, 7 months ago. If we would like to be competitive, we need to focus on economy. We need to focus on the youth. We need to focus on the moms.
Indonesia is the world's most populous Muslim nation and the third largest democracy. The official state ideology is Pancasila. It refers to the nation's unity, tolerance and pluralism. Politics lecturer Hoirul Umam says the clash of sentiment between nationalist supporters and members of conservative religious groups could create an echo chamber beyond voting day.
During this election and also the previous election, Indonesian democracy has been re-challenged by the using political identity which has been exploited by the conservative wings of the Islamic society. In this case, there are some political elements who try to exploit that as part of the political weapon to win this competition.
Kindergarten teacher Siti Maisaro has decided who'll get her vote.
I'm supporting Mr. Prabowo. Indonesia need a president like him.
The 31-year-old is unhappy that religion has ended up playing a role in this election.
Lebih baik agamanya itu dikebelakangkan gitu. Kita untuk semuanya dulu gitu. Tapi yang saya lihat sekarang itu malah lebih didominankan agamanya. Jadi seperti ada niat tersembunyi di balik itu. Itu yang membuat saya tuh kok agak sedikit nggak nyaman dengan pemilihan kali ini.
For her, Jokowi's running mate Maruf has split the nation.
Perpecahan terutama di umat Islam karena salah satu dari paslonnya kan kiai besar yang memang kita hormati, yang memang kita junjung tinggi, yang memang kita selalu dengar segala apa yang dia bilang, dan ketika dia sudah keberpihakan ke satu pihak, dan itu pasti akan terjadi perpecahan.
But for many voters, the stability of the economy remains the critical issue. I head to South Jakarta to meet Jokowi supporter Aji Eliezer, who runs a Vespa workshop.
If you imagine about engine, it's like an orchestra, lots of parts which is working together. One after another, just like a symphony orchestra. The string section and what is this purpose? There's only one purpose. It's harmony.
Aji says his business is also in harmony, and he credits Jokowi with his ability to expand the workshop.
For myself and for my employees and for my cousin and for my family, everything's different. Everything changed. Everything becomes how it's supposed to be.
On one of the last days of campaigning, Jokowi spokesman and parliamentary candidate Zuhairi Misrawi is on the hustings. These women make up a key constituency for the PDIP. Voters like them in poor districts across the country helped elect Jokowi the first time round.
People is so happy here with the program because they receive a program for Indonesia healthy, for Indonesia education and everything. So the people happy and they will choose Pak Jokowi and my party.
It's political faith like that which both sides are counting on. Creating a sense of national unity could well be one of the first tasks for whoever wins. Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers, Jakarta.
Let's go to our panel in Jakarta. Derajat Wibowo is a member of the opposition coalition's National Mandate Party. Shoaib Kagda is the founder of Indonesia's Economic Forum. Before that, he was a correspondent who had covered Indonesia for 20 years. And Greg Barton is a professor of global Islamic politics at Deakin University in Australia. He's in Jakarta to observe the election. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Shoaib, let me start with you. Who's better for Indonesia, Jokowi or General Prabowo?
Who's better? I think they're both good. It really depends on their economic policies, and I think in terms of the implementation of their policies, they both have very good platforms. But I think in Indonesia, the real challenge has been implementation, which has not always gone according to plan.
Derajat, is that the reason why you don't want Jokowi, because implementation hasn't gone to plan?
Yeah, that's part of the reasons. There are many other reasons, both strategic and economic reasons.
What's the main economic reason?
Well, we failed to reach a growth of 7% as promised by the president during the last elections. And it is very well accepted in Indonesia that the country needs a growth of 6 to 7% in order for us to be able to absorb the additional workforce. And without that, we will have a serious problem with unemployment. That's why it's very strange to see the official unemployment data fall down with a 5% growth. It's how can it be? And also for strategic reasons, there have been many concerns within the some in the militaries and some also in the security officials about our closeness to China,
right,
to some degree.
Rajat, you have those strategic and economic concerns. Despite all of that, the polls are saying that the people will go for Joko Widodo again. So obviously, it seems as if the vast majority of voters are still not convinced that there's anybody out there who's better than him.
Well, let's see. That's what the pollsters said, but they have been incorrect in many cases before. They were wrong in 2017 during the governor election. They were also wrong in West Java and Central Java, and for sure they were wrong about my parties in 2009, 2014, and so let's see how it goes on 17th of April.
Okay, I'd love to talk to a pollster as well because you're questioning their credibility. Greg Barton, something that's been central to this entire election is Indonesian Muslim identity or the Islamic identity of the majority of citizens, and both leading candidates have seemed to lean on so-called hardliners during the campaign or in the build-up to the election. Tell me what's behind that and what that means. Is it just pandering or is it a reflection of a certain strain in society? What's going on there, Greg?
There is a certain anxiety about allowing hardliners to give any opportunity to them to wedge you or to bring you under pressure. So I think both candidates are wary of that. Both candidates as individuals tend towards a moderate position. Joko Widodo was stuck with a running mate, probably not of his choice because of the other parties not wanting the man that he wanted. He was stuck with an aged cleric who's head of the National Ulama Council, who has a track record of rather reactionary views. So that's been lead in his saddlebag. It's made it hard for him, but it's also closed the door on the sort of campaign that was run against him in 2014. So swings around about. We're not dealing here with a contest between Islam or not Islam. Both candidates in that respect are moderate, but there is the case that Prabowo leans more to using the rhetoric and style of a strongman, and that has some people worried.
Okay, so let me ask you, Shoaib. Prabowo was siding with those who helped bring down Ahok on blasphemy charges, right? And then we also have, as was mentioned by Greg, Jokowi's alliance with Ma'ruf. Give me the genesis of that. Tell me what's going on in Indonesian society that is happening, Shoaib.
Well, I think Indonesia is part of this global trend of moving to the right, growing religiosity across Indonesia. I think more and more people, Muslims, especially young people, are feeling that the identity is very much tied in with their religion. And if you say Indonesian, Islam is a factor, it has to be a factor because 95% of Indonesians are Muslims. So it cannot not be a factor. I think one of the key things that many people are not paying attention to is that the rising millennial class within Indonesia, they're 40% of the electorate. There's 70 to 18 million Indonesians who are between 25 to 35. I think that is where the election will be determined because these people, while they may be religious, they also want a better future for themselves. They want jobs. Mr. Rajat talked about unemployment. I think the problem is underemployment because a lot of Indonesians are coming out of universities and being underemployed. They're not getting the jobs that they feel that they should be getting. I think this is the challenge for both candidates.
Rajat, you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. Youth unemployment and underemployment is a very serious problem here because based on the UN definition of unemployment, if you are working more than 1 hour in a week, you are called employed. So in Indonesia, if you cleaning grass for 1 hour, then the statistical agency will record you as employed. While cleaning grass for 1 hour doesn't give you enough means to provide for your family. So I agree with Pak Sueb that underemployment is a very serious problem here.
Greg Barton, how would you compare this election to 2014 when Jokowi got 71 million more votes than Prabowo?
Well, the margin was rather closer than that in 2014, but it is looking like a parallel of that run. The polling so far suggests a similar margin. Of course, in a two-horse race, which this effectively is, you end up converging towards the median as you get closer to polling day. The big unknown now, the factor we've just been discussing, is the millennial voters. 60 million, a third of the potential voters under the age of 30. Many of them perhaps having lost hope in Jokowi, no longer inspired by him. It's sort of a little bit like the hype after the first term of Barack Obama. People began to be disappointed. The same Jokowi. So if people don't turn up and vote, that's when there's an opportunity for Prabowo to effectively benefit from what the Indonesians refer to as golput, either not voting or making a donkey vote. And that's the big unknown. It's a young voter now that's going to determine this.
Shoaib, it's interesting that Greg mentioned that it's almost like Obama's second term, or the fact that some people had apathy or they had all this hope the first time around. Is it a fair criticism that Jokowi became more and more like the military generals that he opposed when he was running for election the first time? Once he got his feet under the desk and into the job, he realized there's some pragmatic things that he has to do as leader?
Well, I think absolutely right. Every leader over-promises during the election campaign and finds it very difficult to fulfill those promises when they're in office. I think with Jokowi, actually, if I may say so, the young people have actually been very disappointed with his selection of his vice president. That does not bode well for Indonesia going forward. As I said, these young people are looking for a future for themselves. They don't see the vice president under Jokowi as a role model for themselves or someone who understands their world. Today, the millennials, we live in a digital economy. This person does not have any idea what a digital economy looks like or what it should be. So this election, I think, is a watershed election because it really will determine how Indonesia moves forward in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. There is this talk about Indonesia becoming the fourth largest economy by 2045. That's not going to happen by itself. It needs to have visionary policies and implementation of policies that will take this country forward. Now, the question is, which candidate has that vision? And the millennials will only grow because the rate of production population in Indonesia is over 2. So the population will continue to grow. There's a 30-year window in terms of Indonesia leveraging on its demographic dividend. This is going to be a critical election.
And Drajat, a lot of these young voters are digital natives, and they've been consuming a lot of fake stuff. I hate using the term, but fake news. They've been consuming a lot of rubbish, a lot of lies, particularly directed at Jokowi. Tell me what's behind that.
I don't know. For sure, it's not produced by our camps, and there have been suspicions both ways. Pak Jokowi's camp thought that it is from us. We thought that it is actually from them because the lies can be broken, can be. The lies, it's so simple lies that people knew straight away that it's wrong. It is wrong. So we're not sure who produced that, and for sure we during the campaign we try our focus to the substance of the policies. And I myself even challenged the economic team of Pak Jokowi. Let's have our own debates on the economy. But we don't have any reply. Yeah.
Okay, so Shoaib, of those 192 million people that are estimated to be voting, have the bulk of them been misinformed or misled throughout this campaign because of fake news?
Well, I think, fake news, if you may call it that, is very much part of the mix. I think a lot of people also watch the traditional news channels. The debates that were broadcast were very well watched across Indonesia. The local media has been also reporting on what both candidates have been saying. I think you have to give Indonesians a bit more credit in terms of understanding what the real issues are. Yes, they may consume it, but please don't say that they believe it wholesale. I don't think that it's doing justice or, what you call it, they're not fools. They know they know what they are watching, and they know what these candidates are saying.
Okay, and Greg Barton, from your outsider's perspective, are you observing and experiencing a healthy democracy at play here?
There are certainly aspects of a healthy democracy. There's a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of positive energy at the stadium appearances by both candidates. These 5 presidential debates have been very good. Many democracies can learn from that. But there was a black campaign directed towards Jokowi in 2014. We are seeing that repeated now. It's probably the case that most people won't believe those things. But at the same time, Jokowi is not a great speaker and Prabowo is a more effective communicator. So that may be the bigger difference. But I still think it comes down to whether millennial voters continue to be sufficiently inspired by Jokowi to turn out and vote, or whether they decide that there's not really much difference and they'll stay at home, in which case Prabowo would benefit. Okay, gentlemen, been really good to talk to all of you. I thank you for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Looking forward to talking to you once again on the show. Shoaib Khagda, Greg Barton and Rajat Wibowo. All the best to you guys. Now, as we mentioned, Joko Widodo has faced several online hoaxes accusing him of being anti-Islam or too close to China. The Newsmakers' Natalie Perhernan sat down with Indonesia's communications minister and asked if the spread of fake news has hurt his country's democracy.
In this election, there have been rumours that the president is a communist, that if he's re-elected, the call to prayer will be banned. Why is fake news so prevalent in Indonesia?
I think this is also happen in the other part of the world when they enter into the elections, whether the presidential election or leaders elections. And even worse, because of the presence of the platforms, which is the social media. And in the social media, it's like an anonymous word, So that's why Indonesia is fighting these hoaxes, not only addressing into the people who spread out the hoaxes, but including addressing also the platform, how they can actually help to reduce or even to fight the hoaxes.
Why is it that people believe these things in the first place?
It's about the literacy, because literacy is the most important thing. My ministry, in addressing the hoaxes, is not only addressing the hoaxes, in addressing the negative contents, as well as promoting the good things on digital economy. Then we have 3 levels of strategy. The highest one, or we call it the upstreams, we call it literacy. But literacy takes time. We need a lot of resources as well, to make it people understand and capable actually to digest which one is negative content and which one is the positive content. That is the bottom line of the how can we improve the literacy activities. On the midstreams, my ministry addressing fighting in the digital space, while on the downstream we are helping, supporting the law enforcers, in this case is police, to take an actions into the one who distribute or posting the hoaxes.
What's cooperation been like with those platforms, Facebook and Twitter? They have a very large user base here. How quick have they been to respond?
They can do more compared to what they deliver right now. By artificial intelligence, machine learning behind their platform, they can identify earlier redundant responded based on our request. I think that is what the platform has to do. Secondly, actually, this is more important even, there is an anonym. We are requesting to the platform to when they activate an account, the social media account, has to be also attached by the cellular numbers. since in Indonesia the serial number is registered, so we can trace back easily. Not easily, easier actually.
Do you think these companies have failed to take their responsibility seriously when it comes to Indonesia?
I think this is has to be a continuous effort, even post-election. And this is now happened in Indonesia. Who knows, this will happen also in other countries who are entering into the election.
Can you tell me about some of the facts and figures around hoaxes? How many have there been over the past year?
We were able to identify, to validate, and to verify the hoax. We cannot stamp this content is a hoax unless we are able to compare what are the facts actually. Yeah. Otherwise, people will accuse us that you're the one who distribute the hoax. And on last August 2018, we were able to identify 25 hoaxes and increased dramatically. On December, it was 75, triples. Worse in January onward. On January, we were able to identify 175, which is 7 times of December, and February 353 hoaxes. And last March, 453, which is 18 times of August last year. And around 26%, which is most of the hoaxes, are the content with the political issues, and most of them are with the presidential election.
Do you find the fact that there is so much fake news out there is having an effect on people's trust in the electoral process?
At the end, people has to select. At the end, people has to vote, whether for presidential election or for the general elections, to vote who will be the representative in the parliament. And what the government trying to do, my ministry trying to do, is to provide an information, an adequate information for the people so they can make decisions. My ministry has to be position himself fair to everyone, to the candidates in this case, and the issue, my concern, not only toward the election, but post-election. We do not know what will happen the post-elections, but we have to anticipate at least there is a content that trying to divide the people, trying to divide the country. How can we reunite later on after or the post-election? That is a challenge for us as well.
One of your neighbours, Singapore, is looking at increasing the scope of its anti-fake news law. Do you think that something like that has to happen in Indonesia as well to give ministers more power to deal with problems?
Now, to identify is not an issue to us, but the penalty applied probably different. Like EU, they have applied, Germany, they issue the law, they issue the bill that apply the penalty to the platform that considered not to address the negative content or hoax properly. In Indonesia case, if we have to create the new bills, this may takes time, So that's why we are trying to fill in within the existing legislation and regulation. We have prepared to amend some of the government regulations, hopefully soon be signed by the president, then that will allow us to apply the penalty fines in rupiah to the platform that are not considered addressing the problem properly.
Going forward beyond this election, it will be this ministry's responsibility to have a review of the communications. Have there been some key things that have come up that you want to focus on for the next elections to do with the platforms or education?
Number one, we have to focus on the literations, the upstream. Second, managing not only the people, which is through literations, but also to platform. And we see right now the movement, not only in Indonesia, not only proposed by Indonesia, but almost all over the world in the big countries, with big democratic countries, yeah, they are requesting the platform to have more tightened controls, yeah, with regard into the potential distribution of negative content on the platform itself.
And that's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, was Julian Assange's arrest a strike against journalism or illegal hacking? And what will this mean for the future of WikiLeaks? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.